Hey everyone, John Michael Swift here, and welcome to my first release in my looping series. So as I've been running around talking to folks about their things with looping, the number one thing I get into is that a lot of people want to start looping, but they don't know where to begin, and they don't own a looper yet. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my basic experiences acquiring loopers, some of the things that are out there, and what you should look for if you're thinking about getting into looping. So when you ask yourself, which looper should I get? I would say the answer should be, you should get the looper that makes you anti-fragile. Now what does that mean? In the simplest way, it's the one that's going to help you learn from your mistakes the best. Looping really it changes the chemistry of the way you work musically a lot. But in essence, it really just repeats sounds and stuff. And so it's very open and you can use it a lot of different ways, but you want to look at the situation you're in and the type of music you're working on and figure out what's going to help you level up in your playing and get out and meet the most people and have the best creative experiences with folks. And so let's talk a little bit about some of the mechanics around all of that. So if you are just getting into looping and you're trying to decide which one to buy, I would generally recommend that you buy the looper whose cost is inversely proportional to the amount of time that you have to spend as a looping artist. So basically, if you have lots and lots of time and you've got the money, you should get the most expensive looper you possibly can get. If you don't have a lot of time and you don't have a lot of experience, you should get the simplest, cheapest looper you possibly can. And the reason that is because we have a tendency to want to grab the flashiest thing. But in this case, having something with lots of bells and whistles actually gets in the way of your workflow, and it actually is better to get a simpler looper, learn how to work with it, and then to level up over time. I know some people like to buy the best thing just so they have it just in case, but this is a case where it definitely, I've seen that backfire on people, and it's backfired on me in a couple cases too. Now let's talk a little bit about the different types of loopers that are out there. I'll kind of simplify it to four basic categories. There's single track loopers, there's multi-track loopers, there are nested loopers, and there are digital loopers. Now in a short form, the first four are hardware types, the fourth one is a software type. So single track loopers, will often have extra bells and whistles like little delays that go with them or things like that, but they do one track. You might have like an undo redo layer, but for the most part, boop, single track loopers, small pedal, and these are actually really good to get started with for a lot of reasons. The next type is, of course, multi-track loopers, which range anywhere. I've seen 2-track loopers, I've seen 6-track loopers. I'm trying to think if I've seen a hardware looper that has more than 6 tracks. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but the functionality and the bells and whistles on the multi-track loopers can be, you can get all kinds of stuff in that category. And for serious looping artists, those are usually the way to go. The next thing you want to consider are nested loopers. Very frequently these days, people who build multi-effects pedals or different types of pedals will stick a looper inside of a bunch of other stuff. Like the K-oscillator has looping inside of a bunch of arpeggiators and all kinds of other stuff. Two of my multi-effects pedals, my GR55 and my Pod 500X, they have loopers in them. They're not real complicated loopers, but they're in there. The Voice Live 3's got one in there. It's just an extra toy that a lot of people throw into these things, and they're useful as practice tools. They're usually not very practical for performance. Sometimes they are, but they also are sometimes kind of bogged down in the workflow of the pedal. So if you really like to push buttons and kind of mess with stuff, and you really want something to kind of give you a grounding point for your sound, yeah, the nested loopers can work really well because it's an all-in-one deal, and it really kind of limits you to a certain workflow, which is good. But if you want to have a lot of space to play with stuff or build your own thing, nested loopers are a little bit of a distraction. And the last type of loopers, which is the kind I'm getting into more recently, are digital loopers. And these would be basically just looping programs that you can just load onto any computer type device. You can get them on cell phones, you can get them on tablets, you can get them on desktops, you can get them on anything. You can get them laptops. And these are a really interesting category of loopers because often you can get the most headroom in terms of technical ability in the software for the lowest cost. And I mean, there's no comparison. It's not even funny how much more functionality you get for how much of a lower price. but they come with the disadvantage of they tend to be the most complicated and the most difficult to work through. Not all of them are like that. Like the Loopy app is a really good exception where it's usually pretty plug and play. You can get it on your phone and it costs $4. Really easy, powerful digital looper. But even that has some cons to it. But digital loopers are definitely interesting to look at if you're really trying to go to a really high level of looping or if you're on a really, really tight budget. So let me see if I can give a couple of concrete examples of each one of these. One of the loopers I picked up at one point was the RC3. And there's a lot of like backing tracks and things that I never ended up using a lot, and a bunch of bells and whistles that you can do a lot of different types of workflow with it. But the big thing is it's a one-track looper. You put an instrument cable in, you get an instrument cable out, and you get one track. And an undo redo layer, which you can use to treat like a second track, though there are some limitations. But again, when you're starting out, these are the way to go. Everyone I know of who's like a really famous looping artist pretty much started out on one of these. DubFX started on these, Ed Sheeran started on I believe that unit. And it's a really good way to just kind of get used to pushing the buttons, because the loop timing is getting good timing with looping is the hardest thing that you've got to nail down, especially at the beginning. And having just one track and not trying to distract yourself with a whole bunch of piling garbage on garbage is really, really smart to really kind of nail your technique down. And there's an incredible amount you can do by having one looper that can just go for a long time. Now, I will say I've seen a friend of mine and one of my bandmates got the Akai pedal, the head rush, and he actually was really annoyed with it because not only was it only a one-track pedal, but it was a really short loop time. That combination can be really limiting. If you're going to have a one-track looper, that's fine. Sometimes you might want to do short loops, but there's some really cool techniques with doing a single track of a very long extended loop, which I'll get into later in the series. But one thing I wouldn't recommend is I check the loop time that's possible on a single track loop pedal, because if you can only do one 15-second loop, there's a good chance you're going to limit yourself out of some really useful things. But getting something like the RC3 that's got a nice long loop time on it, really, really useful, very worth looking into. And dead simple, can put them in a more complex chain, not real heavy, can usually power them by batteries. So a lot of flexibility there. When you're starting out, that's pretty much a slam dunk. Now the next category we get into is multi-track loopers, which I've probably spent the most time with. And again, when you start to get into arranging, looping stuff, this is really the way most people go. And the nice thing about these is that they are plug and play. You put them down on the ground, you run a couple things into them, and usually without too much difficulty, you get them moving. Now, the difficulty is that when you start to think to yourself, man, what do I do with all these other tracks? There are so many possibilities, and I actually got the most benefit from really just kind of stealing how other artists did it. I'll talk later in the series about how I studied DubFX and how I really kind of copied his whole system to a very exact detail and really punched through a lot of barriers. I think that's a really important trick for getting started with multi-track loopers. I mean, of course, if you have the patience to just make up your own system, go for it. But multi-track loopers can be pretty intimidating. They have a lot of capabilities, but they're so open. And then there's often like little goofy things about their workflow, like the boss pedals don't slave to anything else. So if you want to play with other musicians, often they have to all be on the same gear, which is super annoying. They have just switching between different pedals and how they do undo redo functions. I've heard a bunch of people say, they actually prefer the RC50 over the RC300 because of the way it does undo redo. And the more I messed with it, the more I was like, yeah, I like the undo redo on the RC50 a lot better. But it's like once you buy one of these big clunky, several $100 loopers, you're kind of stuck with it. So having some time to mess with them beforehand and being pretty sure you really know you've got the unit you want, kind of a big deal, because again, these are kind of boat anchors. They're pretty heavy to carry around. They rarely run on battery power, so they limit your flexibility a lot. So unless you're pretty sure you know what you're doing, you're just driving to it, multi-track loopers are a little bit too heavy duty for most people. Now, the nested looping scenario is a little interesting because, again, it's going to be stuck inside the workflow of a particular device. Pretty much what it's going to do is you're going to put some, you're going to have some other pedal that does a bunch of other effects, but it's pretty much has to go into just this looper, and it's hard to get like outside things into it. So you really got to figure out, man, I really just love this pedal, or I really want to just, you know, build my whole sound around the way this pedal works, which, you know, the limitations of that can actually be really good. Like if you, again, if you're the type of person who likes to push buttons, you know, grabbing something like, I don't know, like I said, I got the Pod 500X. The looper on that has some funny, you know, toys on it that are nice. It can kind of reverse, it can do half speed, but, you know, for most practical purposes, the main reason that looper is there is that you can audition your sounds on it. You can put the looping, you know, sequencer before your whole pedal chain. So you can play the riff you want to do, record the loop, let it just keep replaying, and then just tweak your buttons. Which, when you talk about the workflow of the Pod, you know, the Pod's a big amp modeling unit. You know, when you're really trying to refine sounds and you don't want to have to play something and then tweak knobs and play something and tweak buttons. No, you can just play the riff you want. It'll play again and again for you, and then you can tweak the knobs. Oh man, oh man, oh man, oh man. That makes the Pod so much more valuable because it just accelerates the pace at which you can dial in your tones by so much. But a lot of the smaller pedals, which aren't, you know, those huge multi-effects things that do all this stuff, you know, they're really going to kind of put you in a box. And so if you're, especially if you're getting started or you're trying to refine a more boutique kind of sound, those little pedals can be really good. But again, you really want to see that you kind of like vibe with the personality of the pedal so that you'll spend the time with it, because it really, all the sound is going to come out of you kind of sitting there diddling with your pedal and kind of finding yourself in it. Now, digital loopers are definitely something I want to talk about more because this is kind of a new territory for me. But, you know, I recently picked up an FCB 1010, which is a really old but, you know, very large collection of MIDI control pedals. And, you know, my design is to put that on a laptop and have it trigger, you know, Apple MainStage and, you know, control all my units through that. Now, of course, this requires a lot of programming, so it's probably going to be a while before my rig is even up and running. But, you know, even in the short term, I thought to myself, man, I want to go out and do some more looping shows. What the heck do I do? And I started realizing that, like, cell phones have ridiculous functionality. There are, like, GarageBand that comes on an iPhone already has a ton of looping functionality on it. A lot of it's not easy to trigger with a pedal, but, you know, grabbing something like the Blue Board or, you know, the Serisonic, you know, dual inputs. Like my kind of secondary looping rig design is going to be to have like a little cell phone, probably like an iPhone SE, something really old. I can get it for less than $200. Have that go into like a little 2-channel interface. And actually, I like to do parallel looping. One of the things I'm going to talk about later in the series is parallel looping techniques. Like how do you have something going direct to your sound and something else that you're looping at the same time so you can evolve the loops faster. And literally, if I have like an AB pedal for my guitar and for my voice, and then I got a 2-channel input, and then kind of a 2-channel amplifier with like an aux input for my cell phone, you know, you have a ridiculously powerful looping rig with, you know, and it's going to cost you less than $500 for everything. Whereas, like, you know, you could go, you know, for a rig, you know, much more powerful. It's like, you know, like DubFX's rig was another rig that I copied. If you get the amps and the battery and, you know, the multi-effects pedals, you're looking at closer to $3,000 for everything. Whereas, like, you can have an extremely powerful portable wet looping rig with lots and lots of effects on it and lots of looping channels and lots of routing, and you can, and it's portable, powered by batteries. And you can get it for less than $500, and you've got a backup phone on top of that. A phone is that's the other thing, is like everybody's got phones. Phones are super functional devices. If your backup item is a phone, you know, you've got a lot of redundancy then in your system that makes it a lot harder for you to get thrown off by a technical glitch. And this is the general advantage of digital loopers, is that, you know, I mean, the digital looper I've been looking at is the Mobius Looper. I don't even know if there's support for it anymore because I think they kind of went out of business doing it. But the Mobius Looper, you download it for free, and it's a free 8-track looper with so many bells and whistles on it. I barely can comprehend it all at this point. I'm probably, as I develop this series, I'm going to play games with it and start to get to know it. But it's like, that's a free looper. That's a free 8-track looper. Now, the annoying thing about it is you got to program every single button. You got to say, which buttons do I want to have? What do these buttons even do? You know, are they glitching? You got to troubleshoot the glitches. You have to set it up. You have to decide, okay, I don't like this button arrangement. I'm going to swap them around, you know, and do that a bunch of times. So you're going to end up spending a lot more time with a digital rig, but your flexibility is tremendous. And you know, when you want some new bell or whistle, you're going to pay, you know, $4 or $5 for like an app add-on, and then now you've got, you know, as many additional bells and whistles as you would have spent another $1,000 on for physical gear. So your expandability with digital is tremendous, and the cost is much lower. Well, the cost in money is much lower. The cost in time is typically much greater because you have to program everything. So, you know, if you want the most power, if you are looking to loop at a really, really high level, and I'll be honest, most looping artists you see out there are not looping at the level I'm talking about. They don't need, very few looping artists need a digital looper. In fact, I'm trying to think if I've ever even seen a looping artist who actually needs a digital looper. I've dreamed up a couple of things, and I was like, yeah, if you want to do that, you'd need a digital looper. Like, let's say you wanted to, you know, really loop like a whole band. This is another, you know, I keep dreaming as I'm doing this video. You know, if I wanted to really do a whole band, like really sound like a whole band, but I wanted to trigger everything with loops, and I wanted it all to be live, and I didn't want it to sound like a loopy song. Like everything is just these repetitious things that I take 10 minutes to put together at the beginning of the song, and then they repeat a million. It's like, if you really want it to sound fresh and keep moving, yeah, that's when having an 8-track looper is great, because you can do improvisations that start to see the loops in there, and then when you go to the song, you just trigger the different sections, and they're already there. But again, that's an extremely sophisticated act. I've only dreamed of that. I've never actually seen anyone do something like that. So, and there's a lot of other pivoting around loop techniques that make a lot of that stuff unnecessary. So there's kind of a rare case that anyone would need a digital looper, and that's probably why you don't see them a lot, because they're a lot of work, and most people don't loop at that level. But just saying, it's possible. So that gives you a little bit of a short introduction. I mean, my general advice to people is try to borrow a looper from someone, or like get, you know, an app on your phone and just screw with it a little bit, so you kind of get a sense of what's going on. Because I mean, again, the first thing everyone's going to run into is the getting the setup and the latency issues, which is actually something I'll deal with in my next video, so that you know, like the first frustrations everyone deals with setting up a looping rig, we'll get them out of the way, we'll take care of them, and then you can start making music. But borrow a looper from someone, try what's around, start to get a feel for what you're interested in, and when you pick up your looper, plan to spend a little bit of time with it, because it's really easy to pick up a piece of gear and just have it frustrate you. I actually loaned a looper out to a friend, and he decided, yeah, I really wasn't going to spend a lot of time on this, and I was even just a 1-track looper, and I'm like, good. I saved you from spending a bunch of money on something you weren't going to use. That's the way I think the world should run. So, yeah, so try some stuff. Talk to some people, put things down in the comments. If you have questions, you're like, well, I'm thinking of trying this type of looper for this type of music. What do you think? I'll try to respond and see if I can help. And yeah, but with that being said, yeah, people, use some of the links below. I have a Wikiversity project down there too, which will say, oh, these are different loopers that are out there. These are people's experience with them. Write to each other. Make it a conversation. So that people can kind of find their best zen with this whole thing. And yeah. That's really all I wanted to say for now, and hope you all can give this a try and stick with us in the looping series as I create it more and try some of the challenges, create your own thing with it. Yeah, cool. Hope to see you all in the next video. Catch you later.